Okay, greetings everyone. Now, this video picks back off on a series of videos that we've been building this university Java application. And I want to remind you of kind of where we left off in the prior video, and then we're going to kind of work towards addressing some of these problems. So just to recap, we've got our main Java class, okay, we've got our student Java class, the main class in the main method here, where we have an object called Atom of type student, and we are setting a bunch of properties for this object Atom. We're including assigning some grades. Okay, we've got some methods like we could display the student, we could display Atom here, we could display some grades, right? And we had this kind of bizarre thing that we looked at in that we have two different ways of assigning grades. We have this method assign grades where we continue to just basically add new grade to this person. But then we also have this ability to overwrite stuff by overwriting a particular grade. Okay, and by having access to this variable here, or this array, right, directly. And what we're getting at is what we want to do is let's just take a step back and think conceptually for a moment of this relationship between these two classes, this main class and this Java class. Okay, and let's think about from a design perspective what we're hoping to accomplish here. So I'm gonna use this little PowerPoint window here to be able to draw some things. And I want us to kind of take a moment to conceptually think about this and kind of get a sense of what are we trying to do and what are we trying to accomplish. Okay, so for one, okay, let's imagine we've got our student class, and I'm going to draw the student class like this. Okay, okay, we have this other class main. Okay, now main, right? It has there's a connection between these two, and the fact that main can create objects of type student. Okay, so and main has access right now, right? Has access to be able to get at the first name, the last name, right, as well as the grades, a whole host of information here. Okay, as well as these methods like display, assign grades, okay, where we're actually using a character here to assign a letter grade. We have another one that's like get GPA, okay, and what we're kind of getting at here is right now how things are built is main has access to everything. Okay, main can read and write can go and use any of these piece of information here, right, and can call any of these functions, any of these methods here. And that's not always desirable. Sometimes we actually want to restrict how one class is what is able to access in another class, right? This is a fundamental design philosophy of object-oriented programming, is to restrict access to certain things. Now here's a general guideline, right? You want to allow the least amount of access necessary, right, for something to properly use a class, right? Because if you give any more than's necessary, you're likely going to be like opening up things where it could be dangerous, right? To be able to give more access than is necessary to kind of quote unquote do the job. And so right now, one thing that we've seen is that one of the current problems is that we have this issue where we can assign grades here and we also have access to this grades array. Okay, and that makes it kind of confusing, is that sometimes we want to be able to make some information available and sometimes not. So let me explain from a code perspective. Okay, and we're going to learn a couple new things here. And rather than explain these to you by showing you PowerPoint slides or anything like that, I'm going to show you with real code, and we're going to kind of walk through the example together from much more of like a code-oriented perspective. Okay, so right now, we've noticed we've been seeing this public keyword, okay, also reserved word, right? It's built into the language, reserved word, hence the blue syntax highlighting. And public means that anything that's public, I can use over here. Okay, it's accessible by something on a different class. So for instance, right, age, right, is considered public. I could do atom.age and I can read that value. Okay, I could read and write to age here in the main class or in the main method. Okay, if I change that and made this private, okay, notice this is now private. I've changed that keyword. Okay, I got this error message now over here that says age has private access to student. That's not going to compile. Okay, and now that could be very, very useful because I'm going to show you something that's a super common way in which we have these data members here that belong to a class and how we provision access to them. Okay, so there's really two types of access, right? There's read access and write access. Do you want to be able to read a value, okay? And do you want to be able to write to a value? And we do that using something called getters and setters. Okay, and I'm I'll write this, and I'm going to do it in the context of this age variable. Okay, so a getter does something just like that. This is an example of a getter. They tend to follow this this pattern where the G is lowercase and the A, right, or the first letter is uppercase, right? I don't need to pass anything in, and I'm returning this private data member, right? Because this can't read it like that, right? It forces it to have to go through this method. Okay, it forces it to have to go through that method to get that value. What I'm effectively doing is I'm protecting that value, right? Now, if I do it that way, right, I'm able to read the value of age from this other class, okay, but I cannot write to it, right? A getter only allows reading that data member. If I want to write to it, I could write this a couple different ways, right? One is I could use this dot. That effectively means this value here, that's the object that we're currently instantiated of this student, right? Notice they have the same name. It's a little confusing, right? But it's actually very common that's done that way. This age means this one, right? The one that doesn't have that is referring to this one here that's passed in. Okay, you can actually do that, right? I'm showing you this because it's really common to see it this way, right? This .age refers to the object that was currently created that refers to this data member, where the other name refers to this one, right? A little confusing, right? But it's very common to see it that way. The other way, if it wasn't ambiguous, if you called this like, right? If you did that, then there's only one age, so it's not ambiguous. But it's actually much more common to see people write it this way. It's actually much more common to see it this way. Okay. Now the set age, okay, set age allows write access to this private data member. Okay, it allows write access to this private data member. So we can enable or disable read and write access by having these getter and setter methods. Okay. So if we wanted to disable write access, you literally just get rid of this here, right? And then main would never be able to write to it, right? Now here, if we wanted to now write to age, we can't do it this way. We've got to do this dot set age. Okay, we have to pass it in, right? We have to use the setter to pass that in. Another advantage of this is it's super helpful for debugging purposes, right? If you're wondering why this, like if you're getting like a weird value for this somewhere in your code, you're like, well, how am I getting such a weird age, right? It makes it much easier to set like a breakpoint or something and trace when is this actually getting called, this method, right? When is it getting updated? It also allows you to do things like you could do some easy error checking, right? Where you could say, well, wait a minute, don't ever allow a negative age to get, to get set. Right, so you can have all these rules in one location. So that's another advantage. Getter and setters are used really, really commonly. And getting back to the problem that we saw originally, right, where we had this issue where we had the grades that were getting assigned here, as well as that somebody could accidentally or like override something in weird ways. How we could avoid that is we can make grades here private, okay? And that would make it where we're no longer able to write to this value here like this, okay? If this was clearly a mistake, if you did not want to allow somebody to do this, you could go ahead and you can by making that private, it makes it where they can't do that. But maybe you do want to allow them to be able to read the grades, right? And if that's the case, if you want them to be able to access this for read only, right? Well, then you just don't build a setter, right? You only build a getter. So you can say, like, for instance, and by the way, these, I should have done this earlier. These are all public. They were by default that way, but you should include the fact that they're public. Same with down here. Okay. So I'm returning the grades. Okay. And so here I can now say something like, a little weird to see it that way. I mean, it might be easier to look at it like this. Okay, so we're returning an array of grades, and this is a copy, right, of the old one. Okay, it's a copy of the grades that were here, meaning that in this case it's not a pointer, it's literally a copy, so that there's no risk of accidentally overriding the values and doing something dangerous where I overwrite this here. Okay. So let's run this, let's test this. Okay. Okay, so we're getting not a number here for the display. We can take a look at that and in just a moment, but the grades display worked fine, the GPA worked fine, right? And what we've really done is we're protecting this value here. So this not a number, let's see why that came up. It's calling get GPA. That came up because we're displaying Adam before the GPA has been assigned, right? So right now we're doing a divide by 0. That's why that happened, right? This is getting called before we have any grades assigned. So we can imagine we could put some error checking in here or something to say, which is actually not a number is actually not a bad thing for that to happen. If there's no grades assigned, that's actually not a bad value for that to be. But if we move this down to after the grades are assigned, then there would be a GPA that would have gotten listed there. Okay. So, the key thing to remember is we've now protected, right? We're protecting the private data members, and we should do that. We could also have things like num grades, right? We don't want to have that accidentally overwritten. This should only get updated, right, when somebody calls what we saw in the last video, when somebody calls the assign grade function. That's the only time this value should get updated, right? So we can make that private, right? But if we want to allow somebody to display the number of grades and iterate through them, we can do that, right? We could just only have a getter for that, where we would have something like okay. Right? Maybe we want for the first and last name, maybe we want to make sure those are always set together, right? So you can get, it allows the programmer control on how he or she would like to approach these things, right? You can have, okay, those are the getters for the first and last name. Maybe you only want to assign the first and last names together. Okay, so we can have a single setter. This sets both the first and the last name. Okay. Now notice that's going to break things over here. We've got a couple things broken right now. We made num grades private, so we got to say get num. Should probably change that to num grades, not grade. Okay. And we should also, here, we can't set it this way. We would have to do it this way. Okay. So, well, let me run this, and then we'll recap what we've done. Okay, everything worked fine. Okay. Now, let's recap what we've done. Well, why are we doing this, right? What we've done, right, is we've learned what private and public mean. Okay. Private means that it's only accessible within the class. Okay. Private data is only accessible in the class. It's global within the class, right? Anywhere in the class, these variables are accessible. Okay. global within the class. Private data members are not accessible outside of that class. So I cannot access directly any of the private data members in this main class. Okay. Public are accessible both within this class and any other class. Okay, as long as we're using the same the packages included. Okay, so anything public I can use directly. By using, well, why do we don't want to make everything public, because we want to have the ability to restrict access to things, so to make the code more readable and prevent people that accidentally make mistakes when doing things, right? You want to assume that whether you as the programmer, or what happens in real life is you have teams of people working on things, you want to prevent access to anything that might lead to someone making a mistake, okay? And what I mean by that would be, like, if they shouldn't have write access to something, right, don't give them write access, right? So if nobody should, if the only way someone should be able to, say, assign a grade is through this function, right, you're having one central place in which grades are assigned, right? Is this kind of almost oversimplified example, but it kind of communicates the point, right? The setters provide that write access, allow you to set private data members, right? Allow you to set these private data members, and the getters allow you to provide read access. Okay, so the setters provide write access, the getters provide read access, and that gives you the ability to control whether or not other classes should have read or write permissions. Okay, you could also make functions private. Okay, so if you had some internal logic that you only wanted to use within this, say, this student class, you can make a function private, and you can restrict that access only within this class, okay? So that you can have some internal functionality to the class that you're reusing that you don't want to expose out to the wider world, okay? So we've gotten a handle on getters and setters, private and public, okay? We've got some more to do. I want to talk about constructors in a follow-up video, but that's enough for now. We'll stop it there, and we're going to continue we're going to continue building out this this example with this university system, and we'll do that using constructors, which I will talk about in a subsequent video. Thanks for watching, and stay safe and healthy, everyone.